You could call it a callous cycle of one-upmanship. Last week saw Kenya's worst terror attack since the 1998 Nairobi embassy bombing. Beyond the 148 killed, there's the depraved glee of the attackers at Garissa University. In one instance, reportedly phoning a student's parents so they could hear her die. But after the Paris attacks, the destruction of antiquities in Syria and Iraq, and most recently, the rally in support of Tunisia, international outcry over Kenya seemed muted. True, when the story broke, it had to compete with the breakthrough on Iran talks. But how about now? What response? Kenyans themselves, well, they're speaking up, denouncing the unheeded warnings of an attack by Shabab militants. After Garissa, the 2013 siege of Nairobi's Westgate Mall, where 67 died, and all the attacks in between, what is the answer to Islamist radicals rooted in neighboring Somalia, but whose following goes well beyond borders? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at Kenya's most recent terror attack. And with us from Nairobi, France 24 correspondent Duncan Woodside, who's been following it throughout. Kenya reporter for South Africa's Mail and Guardian, Christine Mungai, also joins us from the capital of Kenya. We're also in the company of Roland Marchal, who follows the Horn of Africa for the French National Research Institute, the CNRS. Welcome back to the show. And joining us from Amsterdam, Leslie Lefko, Deputy Africa Director at Human Rights Watch. The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, our hashtag F24Debate. Tuesday evening, it was a candlelight vigil that capped 3 days of national mourning in Kenya. Duncan Woodside, how would you characterize the mood in Nairobi?
Well, the mood, generally speaking, is one whereby Kenyans are beginning to lose patience with the government in terms of there having been so many attacks now, and so many big attacks. The assault against Garissa University, the biggest officially since the 1998 US embassy bombing. So we're in a situation now where there are many people who are expressing frustration and some anger as well. Students yesterday who gathered in the centre of town to hand a petition into the office of the president, they were in vociferous mood. They were saying that the government and the security forces need to do much more to protect them in a context where there was just a skeletal presence of security personnel at Garissa University when it was attacked. And some of those students that we saw yesterday demanding guns for themselves because they just lack the confidence in the security forces to protect them.
All right, we can listen to some of those students that you spoke to yourself, Duncan. This was on Tuesday afternoon before that vigil. All right, we'll listen again to those students who spoke to Duncan Woodside, our correspondent, on Tuesday.
We are telling our government that we need security in our country to protect comrades, since we are the future leaders in Kenya.
Coming to tell the world, we're telling our government that until when shall we watch this to happen? How many more do you want to die?
The anger, Duncan, is over the fact that there had been 4 warnings.
That's right, yes. Intelligence reports did suggest that higher institutions of learning would be targeted, and obviously Garissa would be a prime example in that respect because it's in the northeast of Kenya, it's not far from the Somali border, and there is a community within Garissa town where elements of that community are sympathetic to al-Shabaab's cause, and so the militants who carried out this attack could very easily hide within the local population before perpetrating it. So Garissa was obviously a vulnerable institution. Now, we spoke to one survivor who said last year that he and other students had complained about security, and in fact some of them temporarily went home at one stage because they were so worried about the security situation. There was no fence at that stage, but then a fence was erected, and that fence gave some confidence in the students that the security situation had got a bit better, but obviously it was still woefully inadequate in terms of protecting them when the gunmen stormed into the compound, when there were just a few security guards on the gate at that time. They didn't have to go through a fence, they just went straight through the front gates, killing the security guards on duty.
And Duncan, that university is a new university, and it was built 90 kilometers from the border with Somalia.
Well, yes, Garissa University was built out of the remains of what used to be a teaching college previously in 2011. But at that stage, the security situation in the north of Kenya was not as bad as it is now. 2011 was actually a crucial year because that was when Kenya Defence Force troops first invaded southern Somalia, and that was to actively pursue al-Shabaab militants who were perceived to be a threat by the Kenyan government due to a handful of attacks on Kenyan soil, mainly involving the kidnap of aid workers from the Dadaab refugee camp. Now, Kenya went in 2011. Once they were inside Somalia pursuing al-Shabaab, then of course al-Shabaab started to view the Kenyan authorities as an enemy and therefore started to launch significant attacks on Kenyan soil. We saw the 2013 Westgate Massacre, of course, a siege there at the shopping mall in Nairobi, which killed 67 people. And then other atrocities as well, culminating in this latest event where 147 or 148 people, depending on which number you're going with, were killed at Garissa University. But the thing to be borne in mind here is that, yes, in 2011, when that institution became a full university, the security situation was very different to what it is today. And what's happened as well with the al-Shabaab evolution as a group, they were initially just targeting government institutions, army posts, military targets, but their strategy has evolved now to very much focus on killing civilians, particularly non-Muslims. That's their hallmark now, it's their calling card. So the situation has changed tremendously in the last 3 years and become a lot more challenging for the security forces to address here in Kenya.
Leslie Lefkoff, let me ask you, could this attack have been prevented?
Well, I think that there's no question that the Kenyan security forces could be doing more. Every response they make is haunted by the fact that the Kenyan security forces are incredibly corrupt. There is enormous room for failure there, and there is no accountability when they do fail. I mean, we mentioned the Westgate attack earlier. The Kenyan security forces were shown to have failed in significant ways in their response to that attack, and yet there's been no real follow-up, no reforms of the kinds that have been recommended for years. So I think this is one of the main challenges that faces the government now is, are they going to act on the kinds of reforms that have been pointed out to be desperately needed by the security forces, both police and military, for years? Are they going to take these reforms seriously, or are they going to continue in the same modus operandi, which is, you know, not preventing these attacks, not protecting civilians, and then often launching very abusive counterterrorism operations against the communities where these attacks are happening?
Where these attacks are happening, Roland Marchal, just remind us, there are a lot of ethnic Somalis who are not Somalians, but Kenyans.
Yeah, of course. They are mostly located in northeast Kenya, as well as in the main cities such as Nairobi, of course. Now you have refugees from Somalia as well, in Dadaab, which is one of the biggest refugee camps in the world. The tentative figure is about 400,000 people there. And then in Mombasa as well, you still have a remnant of refugees settled there. But the point I think the Kenyan government has problem to address is a large part of the team that undertook this killing is actually from Kenya. And the logistics, and it's a Kenyan problem. And definitely the Kenyan government tries still its best to say this is imported from Somalia. It could have been true, it's still true in part, but now the issue and the problem he has to address is no more how to secure the border with Somalia, is how actually we behave in a way to stop radicalization among our own Muslim community, and how we restore some kind of trust with the state. And this is not an easy problem to address.
All right, we're going to hear from President Kenyatta what he had to say on that in just a moment. Just to tell you, though, on that score, 5 arrests so far. The manhunt on for the alleged mastermind, Mohammed Mohamud, a former Kenyan school teacher, as Roland Marchal was saying, a Kenyan citizen, not a Somali. An offer there, as you can see, of a $215,000 reward. We're also getting word, Duncan Woodside, that one of the 4 gunmen was a once promising university law graduate.
That's right, yes. Mohammed Abdullahi was a promising law student. That's the way he's been described. He was also very good at maths before that at school, and was keen on football, so not really the profile of a suicide attacker that you would expect. But then quite often that's the case. People are radicalized and they can turn very quickly once the extremist ideologues are able to access them. What's perhaps slightly unusual in this case is that he came from quite a wealthy and privileged background. In fact, his father is a significant player in local politics in northeastern Kenya. So perhaps surprising that such a young man would be turned in this way. But obviously that's reflective of the fact, as Roland was saying before, that this is increasingly not just a problem for Kenya that's emanating from Somalia, but is on Kenyan soil. And there are many reasons for that. There's a lot of feeling of disenchantment and disenfranchisement in northern Kenya and also the coastal areas among not just young Muslims, but wider communities as well. And it's the young Muslims, obviously, who are the most militant or most prone towards being exploited in that respect, and they take the militant path from there. And that's increasingly a problem in Kenya. There is massive amounts of radicalisation going on place. It's something going on at the moment, and that's something that's been partially acknowledged by the government, although perhaps not to the extent that other people are saying. I mean, for example, that there's a prison close to Mombasa, and there's a moderate Muslim group, a human rights group, which has been saying that this prison is absolutely infested in terms of it being a breeding ground for radicalisation. So very much now, Kenya itself is grappling with rising extremism internally, even if that extremism was partially stoked, or to begin with, by Kenya's intervention in Somalia.
All right, let's bring in the Mail and Guardian's Christine Mungai on this. Christine.
Yes.
Has the government been in denial of sorts when it comes to homegrown radicalization?
I think so. I would agree with that statement. I think that there's so much of passing the buck and not being willing to just deal with the issues as they are. There is a lot of homegrown terror, I can say. There's a lot happening within Kenya's borders, but it's so easy to blame Somalia. It's so easy to blame Somalis. It's so easy even to blame Kenyan Somalis and kind of have these broad strokes where we do this mass profiling, but not much intelligence going into our security measures. So I would say that the response really has been far, far, far below what we expect, far below standard.
All right, that brings us to of course, what has been the topic of news today. Kenya's police chief issuing a list of 85 people and companies, including at least 13 money transfer companies of suspected link to the Al-Shabaab militias. First hit are Somalis. And of course, the banking system there has failed because it is a failed state in Somalia for more than 2 decades. Somalia very worried about this stoppage of remittances from Kenya.
The closure of Somali remittances shocked us, and it caused difficulties in the country because Somalis inside of the country depend on their relatives abroad. Some of the families were hit hard by this move as they cannot buy food and clothes.
Roland Marchal.
Yeah, people have to understand. These money transfer companies are not in the informal economies. They are registered. They have a license from the central bank. The Central Bank of Kenya is supposed to monitor whatever they are doing. So it's very strange that suddenly, out of the blue, they identify 13 companies are cooperating with Shabab. Why not before? What they have done? Why they haven't investigated before? Now, if you look the list as well, there are some funny other aspects. For instance, they froze the asset of Sheikh Mohammed Oumoul. Is not known here in France, but Sheikh Oumoul is actually a leading Salafi sheikh in Kenya, who in Ramadan 2010 actually took a very vigorous stance against Shabab, telling people that actually Shabab was not behaving as Muslim, they were behaving like sectarian people who should not be considered part of Islam. So it was a very strong statement, the first expression of a division, a split within the Salafi movement against in the support of Shabab.
So you're saying the government should be courting people like this, rather than...
I mean, it certainly, it may not be considered as a close friend, but certainly is not the enemy in this war. And now what the government is doing is just behaving like if he were a criminal. He's not a criminal in that war.
Christine Mungai, do you think this will just be a temporary measure, this stop on remittances and money transfers to Somalia?
Oh, yeah, definitely. You know, this is what I'm talking about, broad strokes and lack of reflection and, you know, intelligence in the way that we handle our security matters. It's very easy to put money transfer companies on a list, but it's much harder to deal with the institutional failures that make Kenya vulnerable. And the number one failure really is corruption, because there's no way that people can gain access into the country. And this happened even during Westgate, that you know, people came in, the whole thing was planned and people were bribed and all that stuff, and really it's a much deeper and much bigger problem. It's easy to just have scapegoats, and this is how I see the money transfer companies as, you know, it's convenient, but it's just a short-term stopgap measure, just as we saw after Westgate, when, you know, virtually the whole Somali community in Nairobi was profiled, and that didn't help, because we have had another attack in just over a year.
Leslie Lefkoff, should the international community be doing more to help on this score?
Well, can I just add one thing on the list? Because also on this list of organizations and individuals are two NGOs, two non-governmental organizations. They're actually human rights groups, Muhuri and Haki Africa. And these groups have been doing very strong work investigating and documenting abuses by the security forces in the course of their operations at the coast. Both of these groups have been reporting on serious violations, beatings, alleged disappearances, and extrajudicial killings by the security forces. So there's also a lot of concern that these two organizations have been named on this list, and it raises many questions. The list broadly raises questions about the process, the procedure. How could the central bank just suddenly start freezing these organizations and individuals' bank accounts? One would think there would need to be more of a process for that. And two, the question is who exactly is on this list and why? And I think this, this raises the broader question, is somebody putting organizations like these human rights groups on this list in order to try to silence them and the critical work that they're doing?
We're going to pick up on that when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate.